Shalom friends, and today we're touring in an amazing site called Arad or Tel Arad. Tel Arad is a big archaeological site that is built from two parts, an ancient one and a more ancient one. First of all, our location. Well, we're in the Negev area, in the desert area of Israel, at the eastern side of it. And Arad's location was very important in ancient times because it could control ancient times as well as today, because it would control the road leading from the east, from the Dead Sea area, Oza, all the way up to the mountains to the north to Jerusalem, and so on. This area over here that we're looking at is the lower part of Arad and the more ancient part of Arad. We're looking at archaeology that are older than 5,000 years ago, which is amazing. There used to be a big community all around here. The city was quite big. We could see the walls around. Its length is about 1,200 meters, around 3,600 feet. Inside the city, we find houses, Arad class houses. The houses were more or less the same, which comes to show us that there wasn't really classes here in the site of Arad, but there was a governor and there were government structures around here as well as public structures. We're looking at a community that were pagan, and we find here altars of paganism. The biggest problem that these people had around here would be water, of course, water. We're in the desert area, not much water here today. But get this, back then we believed that there was more rain, more water, and the climate here was a bit different. You have channels, underground channels that would collect water from the houses, from the rooftops, or from floods coming through here into cisterns at the lower part of the city. So this community existed for quite a long time. We believe also that they had a connection to Egypt, southern from here. We believe that from the Dead Sea area, they brought asphalt and sold it to the Egyptians for embalming. The connection here was great, and the city had great profit. But something happened along the way. We believe that the climate changed. It became drier around 4,500 years ago, and all this community ceased to exist. No more Arad. So for 1,500 years, no community around here. But then what happened? The tribes of Israel, of course, settled in the land, and there was King David. There was the kingdom of Israel, and they decided to build here a fortress on the higher grounds. Of course, water would be a big problem back then, so the community here of the fortress would be smaller, but they had their ways of dealing with it. For instance, in the lower point, they built a big cistern, kind of like a big well, and they filled it up with flood water from the winter time. And then from here, from the lower part, from more ancient Arad, they would bring the water all the way up to the fortress. And this fortress was very important. one of many fortresses that existed upon the Judean mountains in the time of the king to protect Jerusalem and the kingdom as well. So let's head up there. So friends, we reached the higher grounds, the ancient but less ancient out of the two parts of Arad. And this used to be a fortress in the time of the kings of Israel. You could see the entrance from the eastern side and watchtowers on all corners. But a lot of this has been rebuilt for your better understanding, for our better understanding. Along the wall, there's a restoration line. Showing us what archaeologists found when they came here. Below it was standing, above it was redone. Now the fortress stood from the time of David, let's say 3,000 years ago, until almost the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. Here, around the year 600 BC, the Adamites came and destroyed it. Let's go inside. Let's see what this fortress is really about. Come on. So we made it. We made it to the top, to the peak of the fortress of Arad from the time of the kings. Many other fortresses existed along the Judean mountains in the time of the kings to protect Jerusalem, to protect the kingdom. This fortress is a small one. Only a few soldiers dwelled here. And they had a few structures within the fortress. One of them is one of the most amazing structures that we find here in the land. So from the peak, we came down to a lower level within the fortress area. And here we find structures such as storage rooms, structures where the soldiers dwelled. Of course, you have to fill up the storage room with grains, with olive oil, wine, food for the existence of the soldiers around here. You don't have any city nearby where you could bring products to the fortress, so you have to fill it up. When the convoy comes, it drops food here and grains and other products. So these storage rooms were a must. The most important, most amazing structure that was found here in Tel Arad was a temple. Let's head there. Here we are in the temple that was covered from the time of the kings. Again, this is a temple that stood strong and was active even when the first temple was standing in Jerusalem. Now I entered the hall area of the temple, and what would you think to find here? An altar. This altar, an original altar, is built exactly as scriptures command us to, as the Lord commands us to. In Exodus 20, verse 24 to 25, it talks about an altar made out of soil, of land, of earth, and also the rocks that you build it with has to be uncut stones. And that's exactly what we find here. And on top, two rocks, one big one one smaller one of where the animals would be sacrificed into. And you have stairs leading up. And almost at the top of the stairs, you have two altars to light incense. And behind that point, that would be known as the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies, just like in Jerusalem. And you have two stones, kind of like tombstones, standing up. You can only see one now. And these would be the marking of the Lord of Israel. Now, why do we know that this is an Israeli temple for the God of Israel? Because we found ceramics with names of priests, of royal family members that existed in Israel at that time. We found the names here, just inside. Now, perhaps in the times of the reform of Hezekiah, when there was no more offering, no more sacrifice outside of Jerusalem, only in Jerusalem did they get rid of the altars. We see it all over archaeology here in the land. We see it in Beersheba. We see it here as well. But this temple, not an altar, but a temple, was not destroyed, but covered with soil until we came in our time and revealed it once again. This is the only temple that we have in the land of Israel today that we found, which is amazing. For more than 2,600, 700, 800 years ago. So now they needed water, but they took care of that problem. Remember down below, in the old city, the more ancient part of Arad? Well, the people from the time of the kings of Israel, they dug there a big cistern, and they collected the floodwater that were coming from the mountains, from the Judean mountains, leading it in channels all the way to that cistern down below. And then they would walk up with the water containers and then fill this cistern inside the fortress. So inside the fortress, they did have water for a time of need, for a time of siege. In one of the rooms here, we found archives, sets of letters written on astracans, fragments of potteries written upon them in ink, and it was sent to a man called Eliashiv ben Ushiyahu, and he was the leader of this fortress. And over there in the letters, it talks about the food that needs to be provided here for the soldiers inside the fortress, or even people passing by on convoys that enter here. But also there is one letter that is very touching. He writes about the last days before this fortress fell by the Idumeans. Actually, a few years before the temple fell in Jerusalem by the Babylonians. But we're back here, and we're standing in this fortress stronger than ever. Folks, I hope you enjoyed Tel Arad. It's a fascinating site. Not too many people come here, which is a shame. See you next time. Shalom, and be well.